Welcome to Honoring the Journey. This is Leslie Neese, your host, and I am here today with the beautiful Angela Herrington. And I have actually been following her for a little while because I don't know if you're in the deconstruction community at all. You're always looking for voices that resonate, and hers definitely does. She just wrote a book that I'm super excited. I haven't read it yet, but I'm excited to deconstruct your faith without losing yourself. I
hmm
love that. I bet you get a lot of that in your coaching, don't you, Angela?
I do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Well, and so she is an author, she's a deconstruction coach and seminary trained online pastor, and just a wonderful human being. I'm so excited to have you here today on Honoring the Journey. Thanks for joining us, Angela.
Thanks for having me. These podcast conversations are just one of my favorite things right now because they're always different. I get to meet
Yeah.
new people and they're just so life-giving. So, thanks for having me.
Well, it's funny. I feel like, I'm of course doing the podcast to help other people. But what I'm realizing is every time I do an interview, it's like having coffee with a new friend and getting to know
Yeah.
them. And for somebody who, deconstructed very quietly and alone, it's really fun that my community is growing now. And I love that. So I'm
Yeah.
excited you're a part of it.
Yeah, deconstruction is such a lonely, isolating thing.
Oh,
Especially if you're in more religious, conservative religion communities, you can't
yeah.
exactly go to the coffee shop and talk about these things because there may not be anybody else in your area doing it. So there's a
So
lot of
true.
pros and cons to the internet and social media and technology, but I really think deconstruction communities are one of the best things.
I absolutely agree with you. And,
Mhm.
especially the way I look at it is when people first start realizing I'm going through something, I need to start searching, they don't want to
Mhm.
tell people that they know because they're
Right.
scared. And I mean, I know me, I didn't say anything even to my husband, who I tell everything
Mhm.
to because I was like, he's
Mhm.
going to think I've lost my mind. So the only voices that I heard were the ones online.
Mhm.
And they probably just podcasts and different things that I would read, and I just was like, oh my word, I'm not the only person in the world
Right.
feeling this and going through this and
Yep.
questioning this. So okay, well, we're going to get into so much of this. I'm
Okay.
so excited, but before we do, Angela, I
Yeah.
just started do it recently. I don't know why, but I thought it would be fun to start the entire interview off with just this random fun question to get to know you as a human being, because we're going to get
Okay.
to know you as a deconstruction coach and an author and all that fun stuff.
Right.
But I want to know Angela Harrington. So, let me see. How about what is your favorite funny story or anecdote that you like to share with people?
Oh my gosh. I okay, so I'm a mom of 5 and we have ridiculous stories everywhere. Like there's
Oh,
just
yeah. Oh, yeah.
in a big family, there's always funny things happening.
Uh-huh.
Gosh, narrowing it down to my favorite is really challenging.
Okay, your favorite today. There we go.
My
Because, like,
favorite
I know
today.
what you mean.
Okay, so this is so my daughter would tell you this is her favorite mom story right now. Last year we went on what we called Bakery Palooza, and just my daughter
Mhm.
and I touring bakeries because she's thinking about being a pastry chef, and
Ooh.
and so it was just the two of us, real casual. And we were on a road trip out of state, and I realized I didn't have like I only had like half of my makeup. Somehow I forgot it, and
Oh,
I
no.
thought, okay, I gotta have my makeup when I go to the bakery because that's silly, right?
Yeah. Duh.
But I didn't have my eyebrow kit. And I was like, "Oh, it's no big deal. I've got mascara." And I
Oh,
put mascara on my
no, you did
eyebrows,
not.
and
Oh,
I
my
looked
word.
like Eugene Levy's long lost kid. So I was sitting in the car trying to wipe it off, and she was just like, "I don't even think I want to go inside with you." And of course she did. But every once in a while, and this was like a little over a year ago, and every once in a while, I'll say something about, "Oh, I'm gonna let me finish my makeup or something," and she's like, "You gonna put mascara on your brows?" It's just so I'll be like 90, and she'll be
And
making
she'll
fun of
be
me for
asking
putting
that.
mascara on my brows in my
Oh,
40s.
that's so funny.
But
So
yeah,
okay, yeah, I can relate. I've done some weird things. I didn't
yeah.
even think about doing my eyebrows until, I don't know, probably 10 years ago. A girlfriend of mine was
Mhm.
like, "You really should do something with the eyebrows. They thin
Yeah.
out as you get older." And I was like, "What do you mean?" So she taught me how to do it, and every time there's probably things you do that you're like, "I
Mhm.
remember when so and so taught me to do this." And,
Right.
like, every time I put my eyebrows on now, I'm
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, thanks, Rhonda."
Yeah, mine's the same way with my daughter's voice saying, "Don't ever do that again."
So tell me a little about your kids. How, you said
Yeah.
5 children?
I do
Wow.
have 5. Yeah, my oldest is almost 30, and my youngest, who is the only girl,
Oh,
is a
wow.
freshman in high school this year. So we have 2
Aw.
that are still home. I have a junior in high school and a freshman.
Uh-huh.
I've got one kiddo who is at college, only about 45 minutes away, so it's not too far
Not
away.
too
And
bad.
then I have 2 grown-up children who are out in the world doing things.
Out in the world doing things. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I have 4 kids too. So like between us, like we have a team. You know what I
I
mean?
know. I know, right? Let's get
Yeah.
them together so they can go out and make us enough money to
There you
have a happy
go.
retirement.
Yeah, we can be momagers. It'll be great.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well, that's fun. Okay. So and you
Mhm.
guys are you live in what, Indiana? Is that
I'm in
right?
Indiana. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So when
What's
I talk about
Indiana like?
conservative communities,
Is
I
it?
really mean so.
Oh.
For those who are familiar with politics in the US, Indiana is the home of Mike Pence. Sorry.
Oh,
And,
gotcha.
there as a human being, he's fine.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really I would say conservative, but I would really say there's a lot of fundamentalism here.
Uh,
There's a lot of Christian nationalism, and it's just seen as being a good human being,
yeah.
without any regard to the harm that's being done. So, there's a lot of
Yeah.
people here with good intentions who are just on the wrong path, definitely on the wrong side of history, as we've had to say so many times since 2020.
I know. I know. It's just
Mhm.
been whew, enlightening, I guess is the word. And I think that's I mean, 2016, the political climate, I think is
Mhm.
what got me questioning. And
Yeah.
then 2020 just took me over the edge.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like,
And
I don't know
and
about
that
this.
seems I think we'll get 30, 40 years down the road and we'll look back
Mhm.
and there'll be so many of us that have kind of worked through our stuff that we can see those patterns. But absolutely, 2016 and the kind of the lead up to the election, I think primed the pump for a lot of us, especially
Yeah.
those of us that had a lot of just had a lot of privilege in the system. So white,
Mm.
educated, middle class, that whole bucket.
So
Um,
many evangelicals.
Right, right, exactly. So for some, it really started to plant some doubts and some concerns, and
Yeah.
then I think just there's a little bit in the book about how COVID really the COVID closings really allowed people to step back from church a little bit,
They
and
made them. You
we
didn't
were
have a choice.
questioning everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Things like work and school and church and things that we thought would always be there all of a sudden aren't. And in the midst of that, we had people who were fighting for liberation from racial inequality. We had
Yeah.
all these discussions about women's bodies. There was a lot of discussions about how harmful purity culture is. And then there was a lot of discussions about protecting the most marginalized people in our communities, including the disabled, from
Yeah.
COVID. And there were these wild, wild conversations that were happening about um, not doing any of that, like not prioritizing any of the people that are most marginalized by the church. And that's when I think it really cracked open for a lot of us. And we were
Yeah.
able to see how our belief systems were
Yeah.
harming other people that we sang
Yeah.
about, we prayed about, we said we cared about them, but day to day actions just didn't walk that out.
Yeah, it's very disorienting when you are believing one thing and thinking one thing, but not actually walking it out or seeing it walked out around the
Right.
people that have taught you everything. So I
Hmm.
think, I mean,
Hmm.
I like to say what happened for me was I was like, well, if they've taught me this as truth, you
Hmm.
know, what else have they taught me that I don't
Yeah,
necessarily think I should believe anymore? Like, because this
right.
can't be right, you know?
Yeah, and that's how so many people get into deconstruction.
Hmm.
There is choice. I'm a huge believer of choice, but we don't
Absolutely.
usually proactively choose like, "Hey, my faith is rock solid. Let me go undermine it all and see what's
Yeah.
real." Right? Usually, we get a little ways in, and we just kind of come to this point of like pulling strings
Yeah.
and like, "Oh, that's the way that those beliefs harm me.
Hmm.
Oh, crap." And then
Hmm.
we start looking around, right? Like, and we start looking around at who we're harming and what what harmful systems we're benefiting from. And I think
Yep.
that's when people really get into the hard parts of deconstruction. I see a lot of
Yeah.
people who question beliefs that harm themselves, and
Mhm.
that's as far as it goes. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, there's a whole ball of wax that they're missing because they never stop doing the things that harm other people.
That's such a great point. You're so right. And I feel like a lot of times when somebody goes into a deconstruction mode,
Mhm.
and it kind of takes you by surprise. You don't really even know what
Mhm.
it's called.
Right.
It's just something starts happening. It's usually because someone you love
Yeah.
has been harmed. And
Yeah.
that's when you start going, "Wait a minute, I don't
Right.
know, because I really love this person, and the
Uh-huh.
church is telling me they're going to hell, but they
Right.
love Jesus. I don't get it," you know? I'm talking
Right.
about the LGBTQ right now.
Right. Right.
So many moms and dads, whose kids come clean about their sexuality, and,
Mhm.
then they're left with this choice. I remember thinking when I was, deep into it, like, the worst thing that could happen would be if one of my kids told me that they
Yeah.
were gay, because I would have had to make a choice, and I wasn't gonna choose the church, but
Right.
I didn't know how to not choose the church, because if I didn't choose the church, was I gonna go to hell? I mean,
Yeah.
the people that I led to Jesus, quote unquote,
Mhm.
were they gonna go to hell, because maybe I didn't lead them the right way? I don't know. You just think of
Absolutely.
it's so much. It's
Yeah.
so much.
And I think that that's a great example of one of the quote easier choices in
Mm,
deconstruction, because
yeah.
I think when it's something that is harming us on a low level, especially for women and marginalized people, we are
Mhm.
taught that we're suffering because of our own choices. And
Right.
so it takes a lot of work. And the further you are in to fundamentalist, conservative, purity culture, all those things, the harder it is to be able to take a step back and say, oh, no, wait, actually, no, I can trust my gut here. And so that's
Yeah.
a big part of deconstruction with the coaching that I do is we've got to learn how to trust our own gut. And my
Mhm.
clients are always so annoyed when they say, "Well, what do you think or what do you believe?" I'm like, "It doesn't actually matter what I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah, this
When
isn't
it
about
comes
me.
to your belief system,
Yeah.
you have to learn how to start listening to your heart and using your voice and trusting your gut and all those things that so many of us were just never taught because we grew up
Mhm.
either in the church or around the church in in the Midwest where we're steeped in Christian culture. And it's not even a matter of reclaiming it. It's a matter of figuring out that you have the ability to do that in the first place.
Yeah. I mean,
And
it is
that's
a
where the healing starts.
you have to learn that, because it
Yeah.
is completely indoctrinated into you through religion, that your voice,
Yeah.
and I actually talked about this. I was on, Deconstructing Mamas. Actually, it came out
Mhm.
today, and it has been so long since we did the interview, I forgot what it was, and how, like, the indoctrination is just so
Mhm.
inside of you. You
Mhm.
really have to. It's a process of learning to
Yeah.
trust yourself, because they tell you that that's God's voice comes from within, but then they tell
Right.
you the voice within cannot be trusted. So then you're like, "Was that God or was it me?" And the whole thing is just
Right.
so confusing, so
Right,
confusing.
right. And it's, if you disagree with leadership or if you're questioning and you're just a little too far outside the lines,
Mhm,
then suddenly that voice is sinful and selfish and broken.
mhm.
But if you're inside the lines, if you're upholding the systems, then that inner voice is actually God,
Oh my gosh, you're
which
so
is
right.
ridiculous
It
duality,
is.
right?
It's
Like,
very difficult.
how is it possible? And I don't pressure anyone to adapt to certain beliefs or anything, but for
No.
those who are questioning and those who still have kind of God on the radar, how is it possible for a divine being who is all good and created you as good in their own image with the actual breath, either whether it's metaphorical or it actually happened, the breath, their divine breath within you,
Mhm,
how is it possible that anything that would stem from us would have no good in it?
mhm.
Total depravity, right?
Right,
That's a
yeah,
whole,
that's
right, but it says that we are innately evil and broken and sinful, and when left to our own devices, we'll always choose bad.
mhm. I
But
know.
if you look at someone that you absolutely love in a vulnerable, quiet moment, you look at your kids, you look at your nieces and nephews, you look at someone who's suffering in a natural disaster.
Mm,
How easy is it to put that label on them?
mm. Wow.
And then why are you putting it on yourself if you wouldn't put it on them?
Mm, that's so true. But we do
Yeah,
it every day. We do it every
we
day,
do.
especially in evangelicalism. At least I did. And,
Absolutely.
it's funny when you come out of it and you talk to people who are still in it, they're very insistent that, "No, no, that's not the way it is." It's like, "Really? But,
Right.
like, think about it." Like,
Right.
step outside of where you're at for a second,
Mhm.
just for 1 second, and really think about it, because the underlying message is, "If you don't do this, then this." There's all these, like,
Right.
fear-driven
Mhm.
consequences of not measuring up, um,
Right.
and that's hard. That is
Yeah.
heavy.
Yeah. And I think if someone is sitting here and they're kind of like, well, I don't know that my church does that, or I don't know that the situation is that bad. I'm a huge fan of documentaries, and I will tell
Mm,
you to go to a situation in history that you know was wrong, that you
yeah.
know the church was on the wrong side of history, and look at the tactics that were used.
Mm.
Look at Nazi Germany right before World War II. Look at the US, particularly the Midwest and the South, when people were being enslaved and Bible verses were used to not only justify the horrific treatment of human beings, but to say that it was God's will.
Oof.
Go back to the genocide of indigenous people that started, still going on, but that started in kind of the colonization and the westward movement of Europeans into the United States and Canada. We funded that.
Mm. Yeah.
We built those schools, we paid for those schools, and we ran those schools, and we as in the church.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when we get into those spaces and talk about things that we know were horrific, it makes it a little easier to look around now and say, okay, it is actually pretty possible that we're getting things wrong now as a church. And so maybe my concern is justified. Maybe my desire to
Yeah.
take a step back is actually really smart rather than a rebellious spirit.
Well,
Right?
and you do have to deconstruct that, because
Yeah.
that is something I was like, I mean, when I always tell people, when I first left evangelicalism, I did it to protect them. I was like,
Mhm.
"I am a messy, scary person. I am having
Yeah.
these horrible thoughts and
Mhm.
doubts, and, like, I wanna protect my brethren."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm gonna pull away so nobody goes down with me. And, like, I was so
Right.
afraid, because I honestly I really didn't believe that if I went down the road of asking the questions that I
Mhm.
would, I mean, there was no doubt in my mind that I was just gonna end right back up where I was. I was just gonna have
Right.
answers. But
Right.
I didn't get the answers I thought I would get, and that was
Yeah.
difficult. That
And
was whew,
prioritizing what you did, prioritizing
yeah.
the needs of the church
Mhm,
and the needs of the organization,
mhm.
that probably felt really compassionate in the moment, and maybe
It
even still
did.
now feels
Oh,
really
yeah.
compassionate. But that's because we were taught that our
Mhm.
individual health and needs take a back seat to the health and needs of the system.
Yep.
And anytime that happens, people get oppressed
Yeah. Yeah.
because the
It was an
people at
act of
the
oppression for sure.
absolutely. People
Yeah.
at the top of the food chain are always going to benefit more from the existing system than they
Mhm.
are from leveling the playing field.
Mm. Ooh, girl. Keep going.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Well,
There's
okay.
a lot more books in
Oh,
between
I
me and
know.
yours.
So many books and
Right.
podcasts and,
Right.
conversations. So, okay, speaking of conversations, I
Yeah.
wanna know what was your journey like? Like, how did you end up here?
Yeah. So I like I said, I live in the Midwest. I moved
Mhm.
around a lot. We didn't really have a home church, and so I grew up around church. I was a vacation Bible school kid. I went to grandma's church, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
I wasn't steeped in the organizational church as much as sort of the overflow into the community, right? Which
Mm,
now, I mean, we label that as Christian nationalism in most cases.
right.
There's also some white saviorism that kind of comes into that, right? And so that was really my story until my mid 20s. I was divorced. I had two kiddos, met a guy who I'm still married to after 20 years. And we started going to church because we thought it would be, air quotes, good for the kids.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so there was a whole lot of unpacking that had to happen there. His story, he's given me permission to share. My husband's story is very similar to mine growing up. Grandma's church, walking to VBS, those kind of things. And when we sat in the pews, we really we really got a great welcome, and it felt like there was a roadmap. It felt like,
Mm.
here's the rules and here's the path. And as long as you do these things, not only will your individual life be better, but you'll be really embraced by the community. And of course, we didn't
Yeah.
see it at the time. I mean, it
No.
felt, as a recovering people pleaser, it felt like finally somebody gave me the roadmap to know how to fit in. In
And to please.
hindsight, right, in hindsight, there was a lot of amazing people who supported us and welcomed us in, but there was also that legalism that I didn't see as legalism because it was
Mm-mm.
framed as for my own benefit or for my children's benefit.
Even going after people, like, for what they're doing or,
Right.
"I'm doing this because I love you."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that whole
Wow.
that whole just backwards um that somehow this just I can't even concisely explain it, but there's just this sense of the ends justify the means. And so
Yes.
if you have to bully and shame and ostracize and pressure someone so that they air quotes come back to the Lord, it's okay because in the end you're
Yeah.
doing it for their for the betterment of that human being. That's the
Yeah.
same thing that was said in all those examples I just gave a few minutes ago.
Wow.
Every
Yeah.
there were and so a little bit of a trigger warning, just going to talk about violence for like 30 seconds. Feel
Okay.
free to pause it if you need to pause it. Um, there were people who said it was better for us to end the life of someone who was not a Christian than to let them continue to live as Christian. And the church is saying that. And it didn't just happen
What?
once. I know. Had the Crusades.
Wait,
That's
because
that.
wait.
So if you do a little digging, and it's not lighthearted, it's it's extremely challenging.
Okay.
But if you do a little digging and you listen to religion, excuse me, indigenous voices who are talking about, let's just say the schools, the residential schools, which were actually we should be calling them concentration camps because that's what they were.
Mm.
And if you listen and you look at documentation from that period, you look at how you look at the mass genocide of indigenous people, especially across the plains, as we started to realize that property was valuable.
Mm.
Um, there were actually teachings that it would be better for that for force to force them to convert, even if that meant torture and death, than it would be to let them live outside of air quotes God's grace.
Ew.
And it's horrific. I mean, who can sit at a table and say this is okay? And yet, what is happening to our queer friends? What is
Yeah.
happening to our trans friends? Right? We can legalize
Man.
oppression because it's good for their soul. Whatever.
Well, you
It's
know
such
what
crap.
though? I mean, it's funny. I'm sitting here like, I can't believe that. But then I'm like, wait a minute, Leslie.
Wait a minute.
I
Yeah.
remember praying, and it's horrible. I've since had conversations with my children about this. They have
Hmm.
completely forgiven me. But I used to pray that they would be miserable until they found their peace with God, because I thought
Right.
to myself, "You know what? I'd rather they be miserable in this life and then have eternity,
Exactly.
with Jesus." So I'm like, "If that's what it takes, God, make them miserable." What
Yeah.
a horrible and twisted and weird.
Yeah.
And I would, what's really worse is I would like pray this prayer with people at retreats that I'd speak at. Was
Hmm.
like, our kids I was like, "Stand up if your child is wayward," and they'd stand and
Yeah.
then we'd just pray, we'd all be at the altar, "Let's make
Right.
our kids miserable, God, so that they'll seek you."
Yeah.
I it took me a while to wake up from that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and when I did, I
Yeah.
sobbed. I'm like,
That for me has been the hardest part about deconstruction, and it has been the hardest part about a lot of my clients' deconstructions is that not only are we kind of reconciling with the bigger system, right? The church, our
mhm,
city, our state, our government, whatever. We're also really trying to reconcile what we were teaching, what we've passed
mm,
on to our kids and to
yeah,
our spouses and to our kids' friends and those kind of things. And it gets to the point where we really have to acknowledge that even though we were doing things with the right heart, we were absolutely doing things that are harmful.
yeah,
And just the ability to go back and talk to our kids and receive forgiveness for that and to keep that
Mhm.
and to have that conversation is really beautiful. And also, not everybody gets that. And that's
I
really
know.
heartbreaking.
I
Yeah.
know. I think about that a lot. I really do understand that my situation is unique. You know, my
Mhm.
husband and all 4 of my kids are right there with me right now, but
Yeah.
that's not always the case. And it breaks my heart. I mean, things I can't believe that a belief would keep a mother and a child apart
Right.
or a mother and a father apart. You know, like
Right.
it's that strong.
Yeah.
And
And not only that it keeps them apart, but that the person who's pulling away
mm,
actually honestly believes that that's what God's will is.
that's
That's
love.
what that's
Mhm.
love and that's the best thing for that individual. I have a lot of friends. We locally we have a group of it's an unofficial group, but we call ourselves the aunties. And we step in when needed, when somebody needs a hug or needs to be a mama bear. And I can't tell you how many early 20 something kids are out there
Mm,
devastated, heartbroken, really, really longing for even just love and compassion
yeah.
from family members. And what they're getting is just a lot of rhetoric and a lot of manipulation. Like, yeah, I'll support you in X way if you read this book, if you watch this movie, if you come to church, if you listen to some of these pastors whose names I won't even mention here. But
Mhm.
if you like telling their kids that if they do this certain amount of work, then they'll get this little dose of mom and dad's affection or financial support or coming to a special event or something. And it's really heartbreaking and it's also yet on some level strangely familiar. And that's the
Mm,
hardest part. Not that it's other people out there doing it,
right.
but it's like I could still be doing that to people.
Mm, yeah.
I need to tread lightly in these spaces because chances are really good that I've harmed people in a similar way. Maybe not to that
Yeah.
extent, but um, people have been harmed by my lack of awareness and my lack of healing when I was in the church and when I was a ministry leader.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and coming I think that's one of the reasons I decided to get more vocal about where I'm at. I for a long time I protected the church, you know.
Hmm.
I did that because I felt like if I'm wrong, this is terrible, you know.
Yeah.
But I got to the point where I was like, I don't believe I'm wrong. And
Hmm.
I feel like if I don't say something, the
Right.
only voice that I'm gonna leave behind as a legacy is the voice that was on Christian radio and speaking
Yeah.
and telling people, you know, piling burdens on them,
Right.
piling more to-dos on them.
Right.
Um, you know, and so I felt like, you know what, Leslie, it's time. It's time
Hmm.
to, you know, reclaim your voice and start speaking.
Right.
You know, this is what I'm learning. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to deconvert anybody.
Right.
I'm doing this because if I don't, my legacy will be Sister Christian, which is what
Hmm.
I used to be. And I'm not saying I'm not a Christian. I don't know what a
Hmm.
Christian is, to be honest. But I'm definitely not a Christian nationalist. I'm definitely not an evangelical.
Right.
So
Right.
I just follow Jesus. I'm trying to live my life like Jesus.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really healthy way to deconstruct. There are
Yeah.
a million different paths through the wilderness of deconstruction. I think one that is really resonant for a lot of people is talking about what you're not.
Yes.
Figuring out what you don't believe because
Yes.
I mean, I our brains are always trying to protect us. And I think
Mm.
that if we tried to take it all in one bite, I don't know that we'd ever make it through. I think it
No,
would
it's
be
true.
so traumatizing that we would shut down and we would just, we don't have the processors. We don't have the
Right.
RAM and the memory and all of those things to process all of that. So sometimes what we have to start to recognize is that dissonance. Like you
Mm.
said, I'm not a Christian nationalist. Like,
Yeah.
why why is that policy being promoted when I very strongly believe that it goes against God and that it goes against Bible, right?
Right. Right.
Why are trans kids being persecuted
Mm.
when so much of the Bible, especially the New Testament, is like, hey, stop persecuting people.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So you almost have to know, like, you start to tease out what you don't believe in, and that's one of the steps that are in the book. The book isn't legalistic. It's not a step-by-step process. It's a process to think through information without
Right.
that overload, right? It's not a process
Yeah.
of like, if you believe these 10 things, you'll be fine.
Well,
But
and
one
that's
of
not
the
what coaching is.
Oh, not at
Coaching,
all, right.
it's like we don't prescribe anything. It just happens.
Exactly. And that's that
You have it
coaching
in you.
model,
Yeah.
that coactive coaching model is really unique.
Mhm.
And a lot of the support people have, it's not corrective coaching. It's
Right.
it's mentoring, but the label is coaching, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's on the shingle. And
Right.
by giving people the space to start sorting through what they believe and what they don't believe, all
Mhm.
of a sudden they're able to hold space for themselves. And as a
Right.
coach, I kind of hope I work myself out of a job. Like,
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
I love
No,
my
you're
former
right.
clients, but if they have to be with me for the next 10 years,
Yeah.
maybe I'm not actually doing a good job with them. Maybe I'm not
Yeah.
actually supporting their autonomy and their free will
Yeah.
by letting them make their own decisions.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I was talking in the podcast I did with the deconstructing mamas, and we were talking
Mhm.
about the footprints in the sand. And
Yeah.
and the way I look at coaching is, in footprints in the sand, Jesus is carrying you, so there's only one
Mhm.
set. But that's like that Christian mentality of like zero personal responsibility.
Right.
Like, don't worry, God will
Exactly.
do it for you. And
If
so
you're
like what
faithful enough.
yeah,
If
if
you
you're
work hard
faithful,
enough.
then he'll pick you up and you won't have to do a thing.
Right,
And like
exactly.
what I want to do in my coaching, and I'm sure that you feel the same way, is teach them how to walk on the beach. Like walk on the
Yeah.
beach. And like
Yeah.
if Jesus is right there with you, that's great. To encourage you, but like you can't expect to not have struggles in this life.
Right.
You just can't,
Right.
and you have to build those muscles so that you're ready and that you're strong, and
Yeah.
personal responsibility, it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because even personal responsibility, we have to redefine that. Because
Yes.
it's exactly what you were talking about earlier. What we're
Mhm.
taught as personal responsibility is being responsible enough for our own actions that we're not hurting the system.
Yeah,
But what personal responsibility actually is recognizing that our choices have impact on us and on
and
others,
others. Yeah,
but not just others and not just us, right? You could
right,
go to either extreme. So there's
right.
this really healthy middle ground that I just hope that everyone can reach at some point, where
Mm,
you're making choices that don't put yourself last,
mm,
to the point of self-harming. There are always going to be days where I would rather have some downtime, but kids need to be run, or towels need to be folded, or groceries need
yeah,
to be ordered, or something. That's not what I'm
yes,
talking about. What
right.
I'm talking about is, um, I am not in a place. I luckily, where I'm really privileged to be in a place where I have a two income household. In this situation, I don't have to work 80 hours to keep the lights on. So
Mhm.
if I choose to work 80 hours out of a fear and scarcity mindset, if I choose to work 80 hours a week, I'm not going to be able to do that very long. But if I
Yeah,
convince myself that that's what's better for my kids, that's what's better for my husband, that's what's better for, things that are going to happen 5, 10 years down the road, I'm prioritizing the whole system while decreasing my own needs and my own value. And especially
mm,
for women, that is important to notice. It's important to say, I can come last sometimes, but my value cannot always put me at the bottom of the totem pole all the time. It just
mm,
can't. It just can't, because again, why would a generous, compassionate, divine being create
mm.
someone who is less worthy of care and compassion and basic human needs than anybody else?
Yeah.
That
Oof.
math doesn't math.
Oh, I
So,
I think you just, like, stepped on some toes in a good way.
yeah.
I know you stepped on mine. Here's the thing, I've been since starting the podcast and doing the things that I'm doing, there's been a lot of investment. And so
Yeah.
recently, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I need to work harder," and
Mm,
I've been so obsessed with it,
yeah.
Angela, that what you just said, just it was like it
Yeah.
whew. About face. Like, I need to really think about that. That's really
Yeah.
good.
The
Thank
church
you.
is really deeply rooted in generational poverty and scarcity
Mm.
mindset. Even the mega churches with millions of dollars, their teachings are still rooted.
Mm.
So you have this sort of fake it till you make it kind of prosperity gospel thing. But think about that for just a second. What does it teach you about who you are if you're broke or if you're struggling financially?
Mm.
It teaches that it's sin.
That you've done
It
something
teaches
wrong.
it teaches that you're not believing hard enough, or you're not hoping enough, or you're not trusting God enough. And it
Mm.
creates this hierarchy where if we're not if we're not thriving by those measurements, then we need to try harder. So anytime we launch a new project, whether it's the book or a podcast or a new coaching
Mhm.
program, we really, if we're in the deconstructed space, we have to remember that starting something new and being vulnerable and putting it out into the world is probably going to stir up that old fear of it not being good enough. And the
Ooh.
way we measure good enough is how many people come along for the ride with me.
Yeah, it's true because that's what we were taught. And
That's what we were
it
taught.
is every day I have to wake up and go, this is not ministry, Leslie. This is
Yeah.
not ministry. You're not, like stop. You're just trying to like put your voice out there and
Yeah.
bring hope and I don't know, a
Yeah.
listening ear to some people. Like don't
Yeah.
I don't know, it was just such a I was in ministry for so long, and
Right.
the cost was so great. Like, if I
Hmm.
don't get through these people, they're gonna die and go to hell, and I can't
Exactly.
have that, and there was
Yeah.
so much fear, and I don't have that fear anymore. I think,
Yeah.
it's been wow. I mean,
Hmm.
coming forward and sharing, like, I'm getting some DMs.
I'm sure. Right. Right.
I I mean, woo, people are not happy with me, but
Right.
I think even worse is like people who you would think would reach out aren't at all. There's just nothing
Yeah.
but silence because they don't know what to
Yeah.
say, and
And
that's
that's
hard.
typical. Yeah, that is absolutely typical. Doesn't mean it's okay.
Right,
But I hear
right.
that all the time. I'm talking about struggling with my faith, and all of a sudden, the people who were my faith mentors a decade ago, they're nowhere.
Nothing,
I,
nothing.
I had that during 2020. There were a few people who were the best mentors.
Yeah.
Like they were like my
Mhm.
church grandparents.
Yep.
Um, who got mad at me because I started talking about racism and started talking about Black Lives Matter. And
Golly.
they're not
Huh.
in our lives anymore. And that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
I mean,
I
these were
hate
people who,
disappointing people. I hate it.
yeah. And
That
that's what it feels
feeling.
like, right?
It feels like
They-
you're disappointing
You're
them.
disappointing them because you're not living up to the person that they know you can be, which,
Yeah.
oh,
It's just like
right?
them.
Right? Right? You're backsliding. You're on that slippery slope. You're not
Yep.
as devout. You must have been
Mm.
distracted, like all those things that we hear over and over again. We
Yes.
have to understand that people who are still in the system don't know how to think outside the system. It's very much a Matrix
Right.
reference.
Oh,
If you've
yeah.
got the
Oh my
Matrix, you know
goodness.
it.
I
Yeah.
cannot watch that movie now without seeing what I've been through over the
Yeah.
last few years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's insane.
That's one
I
of the
saw a
examples we
quote.
use in the book as
Oh, is
like,
it?
this is what it's like.
The red pill
Um,
or the blue pill?
which is totally ironic because if you go listen to any of the interviews in the last probably 5 years from the Wachowski sisters, it's actually the whole Matrix movie series is a metaphor for transitioning from male to female.
No way.
Fascinating rabbit hole to go down.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
as we're deconstructing, a lot of us are, supporting queer same-sex consensual
Yeah,
relationships, all
definitely.
of
Yeah.
that. That's one of the things that a lot of people question. And so it is absolutely fascinating that we can tie into this matrix
Mm,
metaphor. And then also, if anything, it proves
yeah.
there's so many different meanings to it. But yeah, it's very much we have to understand that even people who deeply love us who are still in the systems, they're
Mm,
just not speaking the same language right now. And so, unfortunately, sometimes that means we lose them. Other times that means we lose their support.
yeah.
And we just don't talk about religion. And we have
Mm,
to renegotiate that conversation and that relationship. but it's not because of the choices that we're making.
Right,
It's
right.
because of how they're choosing to respond to
Yes.
us and the choices that we're making. And if we can really get that down into the bottom of our hearts, then I think it takes that disappointing pressure off
Mhm.
just a little bit, but it's not an easy thing.
No.
Yeah.
I saw a quote the other day. It says, "The beginning of love is to let those we love be perfectly themselves and not to
Mhm.
twist them to fit our own image.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we love only the reflection of ourselves that we find in them."
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely beautiful because it's enabling, it's
Mhm.
codependency.
Yeah.
So if talking about religion is too hard right now, if talking about your faith is too hard, go, but you still want to work on stuff, go look at Gottman Institute, Gottman Institute is fantastic resource. It's not a Christian organization. They started doing a lot of work with couples, but I'll tell you what, relationships are relationships.
Mhm.
So things that apply to marriages also apply to our relationship with ourselves.
Ooh,
Right? So if you
wow.
go to the Gottman Institute, the best place I think to start is Gottman's Four Horsemen, just like the Horsemen of the Apocalypse. But it's
Okay.
how people respond. It's how we respond when we're scared and we're trying to defend
Mm.
ourselves. So contempt, stonewalling, defensiveness. Like if you can kind of soak in that article, it's not a hard read.
Mm.
Soak in that article, then when people come at you, you can be like, they're being defensive.
Yeah.
That's related to fear. That is not related to me,
Right. Yeah.
right?
A
Right?
lot of
Or
it isn't as personal as we thought,
it's
you
not.
know?
It's not. Yeah. I have a love-hate relationship with my therapist when she says, "It's not about you." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah,
Oh.
stop." You're right, but I don't wanna hear that right now. I'll think about it when I go home, right? Like,
Yes.
but that's that
Oh,
shifting of how we
mm.
believe, what we believe about ourselves, and when we're taught that everything is based on whether we sin or not, everything's about us. Like
Yeah.
when we're taught that God's gonna, that our life is harder because we're out of God's will, everything is about us. And it just creates a whole bunch of people who are running around all the time, emotionally fragile, probably
Mm.
traumatized, don't even realize it, and unable to self regulate.
Yeah, that's absolutely on point.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a guy that I used to work with in Christian radio. He said that before his wife became a Christian, which I guess when they got married, neither one of them were, and then he became a Christian, and then he said the few years before she became one, it was like he had to carry around a dead body.
Right. Right.
That's what he said, because
Yeah.
that you
That
know,
makes sense.
the evangelical way of
Yeah.
sharing the gospel, the good news, is you are dead.
Yeah.
You are literally not alive in
Hmm.
your spirit, and
Right.
until you receive Jesus by doing this transactional little thing,
Right.
you are just this shell of a human with nothing good in you, and
Yeah.
God can't even look at you. So if you just ask Jesus into your heart, then he can look at you and see Jesus, which is, yes, he's looking at Jesus. Good, he's not looking at me because I am a messy, nasty human. Like,
Right.
this is the
Right.
mentality. Like, I to
Yeah.
me, like, I know it's so hard for people to understand when they're in it, and I know
Hmm.
that if there's anybody listening who's still in it, I love you. I'm not trying to say that you're dumb for believing it. I believed it for a long time. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't see God being like, "Oh, I created you, but I can't even look at you. Ew, gross. Look at you."
Right, right. So here's something that will rock your boat. If you're like, I'm just listening to this because I'm trying to figure out why my friends are deconstructing.
Right.
Do a little bit of digging. Watch a show, watch a documentary where people are getting catfished, where people
Mm,
are they think they've got the perfect spouse and then it turns into this awful violent relationship, okay? And then imagine that the abuser is Jesus.
mm,
And notice how we talk about God and how we talk about Jesus in this way of like, well, I totally love you and I'm willing to accept you no matter what. Oh, but you're also sinful and broken. So you need to prove yourself before I can see
yeah.
you.
But I
Right.
don't even
Like,
wanna see you when that's done, because when I see you, I'm gonna see Jesus. Like, that's the
Right.
worst part. Like, I don't
Exactly.
even wanna be seen by God because I'm not worthy, but could you imagine your children saying that to you?
Yeah.
Like, "Mom, I'm such a bad kid. Like,
Yeah.
I know you don't even wanna look at me, so I'm just gonna hide." And, ugh,
Yeah, that's a
ugh,
trigger for a
it
lot of
is.
parents to deconstruct when their kids
Yes.
start reflecting this idea of total depravity, and they're like, "But wait a second, if you're if you haven't like done the things like uh, accepted Jesus into your heart or whatever in the way that your denomination wants, if the child hasn't done that, does that mean they're going to hell?
Mhm.
Does that mean that
Right.
everything they do is sinful? A
Mm.
child is one of the most sacred, holy things that exists."
Yeah.
What
So true.
what right? So then when parents start reconciling that, they're like, "Oh, wait a minute.
Ooh, hang on a second.
Maybe maybe that's not true for them, and wait, if it's
Yeah,
not true for them, oh crap, maybe it's not true for me.
yeah,
Maybe it's not true for those people I passed out tracts to, or the people that I counseled over coffee because I thought
mm,
their behavior was ungodly." Right? Like,
yeah,
it just starts to unravel and it gets real messy real quick. It's also worth it. It's also
yeah,
worth it.
yeah, it is. Do you okay, so I don't know
Mhm.
why, I don't feel like we covered why you ended up leaving. Did we?
Oh, no, I think we jumped off a little bit.
We got excited.
Yeah,
I'm a
it's
ripper,
fine.
so it's totally fine, but let's go back
Yeah.
to that. So,
So
why did you end up leaving the church?
for the same reason a lot of people leave, I started getting into leadership and I started seeing things behind the scenes
Hmm,
that didn't line up with what we were talking about on stage and out front.
right.
And like I said, I'm in rural Midwest. We thought it was just that one church. We spent many years there and jumped to a different church. And it was a non-denominational kind of independent church
Mhm, mhm,
that was in a completely different setting and everything, and there were some great things that happened there, but there were also some really hard messy things behind the scenes. And so we skidded into a third church, my husband and I remember we were on the way to that third church for the first time, and I said, if this doesn't work out, I'm done. And
mhm,
in hindsight, he was like, I didn't know if you meant you were done with church, you were done with God. He said, I didn't know, but I also he said he was so threadbare that he didn't ask. He's like, I couldn't ask. Like he said, I didn't want us to have that conversation in that moment. So anyway, we
it's a
slid
big
into
one.
the, yeah, it is, right? And so we slid into this church, found a beautiful home. It's Wesleyan, so it's a fairly progressive denomination, but
Nice.
it's not an affirming denomination.
Right.
So I'm not going to church right now,
Yeah.
but I do still consider myself a Christian. That's my home church.
Mhm.
We just found out this week that a long-term legacy member passed away, and I still feel all that grief for him and for his family, and
Mm,
I feel like part of the church that's grieving him. Um, but it there's still pieces that I'm like, oh, I love you guys, and also there's this little piece that we got to work on.
yeah.
So especially here in the Midwest, like there's no perfect church. It's very, very hard
I
to
don't
find
think
a
there is
progressive
anywhere.
church. I don't think so either, but I think that there are churches that are really messy and imperfect and
Yeah,
are also making the choice not to hurt people.
yeah,
And so anyway, yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, I would guess I quiet quitted church. I was a
yeah.
quiet quitter. But when I started talking about deconstruction and we had that label and everything, right around it was there a little bit in 2016, but it definitely was on the rise right before COVID.
Mhm.
um that's when I became really vocal about it. And again, I mean, there were some people who were amazing, but then there were also people who were screaming at me on my page, and not just
Yeah,
strangers, because that happens, but like there were people who would message me and honestly want to have a quiet conversation behind the scenes. They're like, I don't understand, but I don't want to do this on there. Can we
yeah,
talk?
yeah.
Those were amazing. Even if we didn't come out on
Same,
the same
yeah.
side of things in the end, those were wonderful.
At
But it
least they
was the
listened.
defenses, right?
Yeah.
I was treated as an equal.
Mhm.
We were still seeing each other's humanity, and I think that what was kind of the nail in the coffin for me, in a lot of ways, was how many people who I knew to be compassionate and I knew to be kind and loving, um, didn't treat me or my opinions
Mm.
in an equitable way. because as soon as I stepped too far out of that box, as soon as I crossed that line, um, then I was evil. Then I was on the side of evil, um, and not
Yeah.
just like, oh, you're messing up, but like, no, you're leading people to hell.
Oh,
You
yeah,
are doing the devil's work.
definitely.
Yeah, and setting those boundaries is a really challenging part of
Yeah,
deconstruction.
it
I
is.
was actually just talking to somebody last week about the different ways that we set boundaries, and especially with parents and siblings and grandparents. A lot of times we have trouble with them not being in our inner circle.
Mm.
And so what I was explaining to this friend was the metaphor I love to use, which is, think of a house. Think of a little standalone house. In It has a yard, it has a fence, it has a block, it's in a neighborhood, it's in a city. Okay. Not everybody can come into my house at 2 a.m. and come into my bedroom and talk to me. That list is real short.
Real short.
Most of those people are already locked in the house with me at night, right?
Yes, exactly.
But there are people that I would allow to come sit in my living room and talk to me. But
Yeah.
then there are other people who, if they come to my house, we are standing on the front porch. And there are other people who, like, if they come and knock on my door, we're going to walk out and we're going to stand on the sidewalk and talk, right?
Mm.
There are other people who I don't want in my home. They're not safe enough to be in my home, but gosh, I'm glad they're in my neighborhood. I'm glad you know, they work with my husband or they go to my kids' school or whatever. But then there are also people who I'm like, if our paths never cross, I'm good.
Yeah.
So think about that metaphor when you're trying to set new boundaries, because you've probably been taught that anybody that has any authority over you should be able to get access to you at any time and say anything.
Right. That is
Those
so
are
true.
not your inner circle people right now. They might be
Mm.
later, but they're not right
Not right
now,
now. Yeah.
because authority, you don't need more authority. You need space to figure out what is breaking your heart and determine your own action forward. Because you got to
Yeah.
do your own healing, and you can't do that if somebody else is always calling the shots.
Mm. That is so good. I love that analogy. I'm an analogy girl like 1,000%. So that
Me too.
I was like, man, am I tracking on this one? This is good stuff.
Yeah.
I love it. That's
Mhm.
so good. So, okay, wow. Let's talk a little bit about how people can get your book and
Yeah.
like what you're doing on your website. Like,
Sure.
tell us about Angela.
Yeah. So the easiest way to get a hold of the book is just to go to angelajharrington.com. There's a little button at the top where you can type in /book, and it'll give you all the information. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those big stores, we kind of have to deal with them because they have such a huge market share. But there's also a link on my website where you can find independent bookstores. So
Oh, nice.
if
Okay.
you've got a mom and pop bookstore in your area, please buy it from there. And
Mm.
if not, I'm not going to hate on you for ordering it from Amazon or Barnes and Nobles or one of the big chains, right? Like,
Right.
yeah, we have to do what we can.
Yeah.
But it is available. We're actually looking at some cool ways. There's to support people through the book. There's talk about maybe a book club. There's some
Ooh,
interesting
fun.
conversations happening behind the scenes. So I would
Love
highly
it.
recommend two things. I would recommend going to my Facebook page and or going to my website and clicking on the button that says free group, because I have a free Facebook group,
Mm.
and joining that does two things. It gives me your email so I can send you notifications when we do free events. And then it also gets you in a community that has about 3,000 people in it. And
Wow.
I might be a little bit biased, but I actually think that it is one of the healthiest spaces out
Mm.
there for deconstruction. We don't do a lot of ranting. Anger is welcome, but it's anger over topics. It's anger
Mm.
over what people have done. We don't get into name calling. We actually
Yeah.
we have pretty solid boundaries in there, and I have to say that 99% of the time they're honored. And it's just one of those spaces where you can come in and you can say, hey guys, this is what I'm struggling with, or I miss this. We get those posts a lot. Like, what do you guys do instead of worship music? Because I really miss it. Or, what do you do instead of prayer? Because that used to be the anchor of my day. And the people in there are so generous. So those are the things that are most supportive, I think.
Yeah.
And that community is free.
Mhm.
It is also private, so people outside the group can't see what you post. And then the other thing
Nice.
that's really cool, Facebook has created an option where you can post anonymous questions. So you can submit a question, you can talk about your situation a little bit and ask for input. And I, as the group owner, will be the only person that sees your name. So it's a
Nice.
really beautiful space to be able to get support. And I promise you, everything we have talked about in here has been talked about in there. So there are resources
Yeah.
in there. You can search the group. Lots of cool stuff in there. But that is, I feel like, is a great place for people who are just getting started and don't
Mhm.
actually know what they need, but know what they want.
Yeah.
And know that they're feeling really isolated and missing those kind of things. So that's also where anytime I open up a coaching program, or if I have like if there's a free workshop coming up in a few weeks with Erdmans, I always drop that information in there first. So those
Oh,
are my
awesome.
people. That's the best. That's my air quotes congregation. That's not a
Your
congregation.
posse.
Um, it is, that's one of the things my friend AJ always says is that it is a space where you can come sit by my campfire in the
Mm.
wilderness until you're ready to go build your own. And you don't have to
Mm.
bring anything. It's not like a carry-in where you got to bring something. Like, just come and sit and warm yourself by the fire and listen to whoever else is there, and just find that community that is so hard to find
It is so
in the
hard.
midst of deconstruction.
Yeah, I'm actually in the process right now of I'm gonna be starting here in my community. I'm gonna call it religious rehab.
Nice. Oh, that's a great the marketer in me is just like fluttering heart right now. Yeah, well done. That's nice.
Religious rehab, because I feel
Yeah.
like, it's like a support group, but every week I'm gonna have like a topic. It's gonna be like a
Mhm.
6-week thing just for people to come, like
Yeah.
AA, like anonymously, nobody
Right.
whatever's in the group stays in the group. I
Right.
tried to do this a couple years ago, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't even
Yeah.
talking about it publicly. I just needed to connect with people. And
Right.
being online is fabulous, don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
that like seeing a human being in your presence and having these
Yeah.
conversations, yeah, it's just long overdue for my life. And I know there's people in my community that are now listening to my podcast that are asking,
I
can we
love
do
that.
something? And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
we can do something. So
Yeah, that's
it's going
been
to
one
be
of my
fun.
favorite things about the book is that there are
Mm,
people who are messaging me and texting me, and they're like, I nobody even knows I'm doing this, but I
yeah.
just want you to know I'm reading this, and let me know if you do a retreat, or let me know if you do a
Yes.
book chat or whatever. And because I was in leadership and I went to seminary, a lot of those people are pastors,
Oh, yeah.
or they're married to pastors. They're
Mm.
partners of pastors, and that's really challenging because your job is on the line. And so, so
Hmm.
there's a right. So like.
Mhm.
I was lucky. I was already in a place where I was running my own ministry, kind of from home, and was doing some consulting. So I was able to take a step back and figure out what I needed to do, and what I wanted to believe, and what I needed to heal without losing
Mm,
what was paying my bills, without losing my grocery money. Not
yeah.
everybody is in that position. So
I
books,
was one of those.
podcasts, right? Like you can get this book and you can read it in the bathroom every night. Like
Yeah. Nobody
you
has
can
to know.
you can do these things privately until you're
Yeah.
at a place where you feel like you've got your feet under you enough that it's time to take the next step.
I love that. Yeah, I call those people the invisibles.
Yeah,
They're, like, invisible online, but they're doing so much research and they're working so
right.
hard to find answers and
Yeah,
to because nobody likes that feeling of not it's almost like this half-hearted, like, something isn't right, and I
yeah,
just don't know what it is, and, like, nobody
right.
wants that feeling, but,
Hmm.
it's part of deconstruction. It just
Yeah.
is.
And actually, I think it should be part of faith no matter what. But what happens
Absolutely.
is we're told that certainty is next to godliness.
Yeah, it's
And
not.
the more certain you are, the safer you are, and the wiser you are, and the more valuable you are, and all those other things. And so learning how to kind of decompress from that and catch your breath,
Mm,
is really important, because you're not deconstructing because of a lack of knowledge. It's not a
right.
lack of information. The information
Mm-mm.
is out there. What happens is it's a soul searching, it's a conditioning thing. Like many of us have trauma that's unresolved, and that's why we're so attached to the church. Many of us are just deeply conditioned to be attached to all of those religious things that we were raised with. And until you can start finding out who you are and what your value is, information isn't going to help. If anything, it's going to make it worse
Mm.
because now there's more options.
Yeah.
Right?
You're like, oh my
Every book
word.
you read, every book you read is going to be a little bit different, and now you have 40 different options, but you still don't trust yourself enough to make
Mm.
decisions because you were taught that you were untrustworthy.
Mm. That is
Yeah.
so true.
So
Yeah,
push
that
back from the table if you need it. Like,
yeah,
I see I have a lot of books, but I also had about a year and a half where I didn't read anything because I
yeah,
didn't need to read anything except for myself. I
yeah,
needed to dig in and say, what are you stuck on? What are you running from? What are you hiding from? And then I was ready. After I cleared out all that, then I was ready to talk
mm,
about topics and to hear people's story with compassion rather than being triggered by them because I hadn't done my work around that yet.
yeah. Well, and it's not that I mean, you have to work on those triggers. Like, I think
Mhm.
sometimes we avoid the triggers so much, and then it's like we
Yeah.
can't avoid it. At some point, we have to. It's like building the legs to walk on the
Mhm.
sand. Like you have to say, okay, this triggers me. Why? How can
Yeah,
I
exactly.
do better
Exactly.
next time? How can I find a little piece quicker
Mhm.
if it comes up again instead of just saying, "Don't talk about it. You're triggering me." That's hard.
Right, right.
That's really hard.
And it is hard because when we're triggered, all that triggered means is that our fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever else they've added this week gets activated, right?
Right.
And so for people, like a lot of us know, like if we almost get into a car accident, we are not right for the next half hour. Like
Right.
no
Yeah.
matter what, whether we were scared or ready to fight or whatever, we're not okay for the next 20, 25, 30 minutes.
Mhm.
Same things happen when we feel emotionally threatened or relationally threatened. And so what happens is when we get triggered, it's a threat and our body responds in that amazing way.
Yeah.
But part of that amazing way is nobody cares about your PhD program. Nobody cares. Like your brain is not processing unessential things.
Mhm.
A lot of the logic and the thinking through big complex ideas goes offline.
Mhm.
So in the moment, it is really hard to be rational. It is
Mhm.
really hard to feel those deep emotions and to trust your intuition. So figuring out why you're being triggered, doing some work around that, and then setting healthy boundaries on the things that really should be triggering keeps you from going into that space where you can't access common sense.
Mm.
And it's
Wow.
way better for your body. That's a whole nother if anybody wants to talk about bodies, Tara Tang, she is my go-to.
Okay.
I can't even tell you how amazing she is, but she has a book that just came out like a year and a half ago, I think.
Mhm.
Your Body is a Revolution.
Ooh,
That
that sounds
start there,
great.
right? Like if
Okay.
your body is kind of part of what you're getting hung up on, start there and just get to know your body, and then it'll be easy to see why it's so hard to unlearn some of this stuff.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it does. It almost becomes instinctive at some points, and you don't even
Yeah.
realize it, and that's why it's, like, really hard to be angry with the
Yeah.
people from my past. I'm, like, not mad at you, I get it. I get why
Yeah.
you feel the way you feel, but I was at first.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
went
and
through my
that's a
anger
healthy
phase.
stage,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You gotta go through the anger, and I'm sorry to tell you this if nobody's told you this yet, you gotta go through the grief.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And it
The
and
grief was the worst.
it's not a one night Netflix weighted blanket Ben and Jerry's
Mm-mm,
container kind of grief.
mm.
It's a lot. It's
It
a
is
lot.
a lot because I mean, for me, I had to grieve my community, my church,
Mhm.
my beliefs, my
Right.
certainty. I had to grieve my job,
Mhm.
my reputation,
Yeah.
I mean, all of it. And, all of a sudden, people who used to really look up to me don't even respect me anymore.
Yeah.
This is a very hard place to be, but
It is.
you do have to grieve it because if you're going to move past it, you have to acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
that was that one took me by surprise, Angela, not gonna lie. That one I was
Yeah.
like, "What the heck is happening here?" And the
Yeah.
anger part of the deconstruction is actually part of grief.
Oh,
It's like
absolutely.
and,
They're
like, you
they're
don't when
kissing
I tied
cousins.
that
Yep.
together, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I am literally going through every single phase of
Yeah.
grief, and I
Yeah.
felt it
Yeah.
a
And your
lot.
whole body feels it. That's the other thing
Mhm.
people got to keep in mind. You can't logic your way through grief.
Mm-mm.
It comes out different ways for everybody, but I have yet to have worked with any client or had any peer in deconstruction who didn't grieve. Now, I
Mhm.
will tell you that we talked about at the beginning how there are some people who will perhaps deconstruct one aspect, one belief.
Mhm.
A lot of times they don't grieve that. Because
Yeah.
it's a head logic external. Well, yeah, that makes sense. I'll go with that.
Mhm.
But when you really get into the trenches of deconstruction, like when it really knocks you on your butt, it's so emotional, and it's a very personal thing that every cell in your body has been struggling with. So your whole body is struggling under the weight of total depravity. I'm bad. Um every decision I make internally would be selfish, right? I need to die to myself. Oh, I hate that. I need to die
Oh,
to myself. My heart is
yeah.
untrustworthy. Like,
So I can
it's
live for
not just your
you.
brain that's carrying that, every cell in your body is carrying that. So it's almost like you have to wring out gently,
Such a good
compassionately,
reminder.
wring out every cell of your body until what's there is trust and self-compassion and space to heal.
Okay, I gotta tell you, self-compassion is, like, my favorite thing right now. Like, you know how you
Yay!
kinda
I
when
love
you're in
that.
the like, "You know what? You're okay, Leslie." Like, I mean, they called me Sister Christian when I was on Survivor, and she is now gone, right? We've buried her, and I say in my book, I said it's not out yet, but in my book, I say, "I used to stomp on her grave because I was so mad." But now I'm leaving her
Yes.
flowers, and I'm saying, "You were
Yeah.
such a good person. You tried so hard. You loved
Yeah.
so hard, and you now
Yeah.
know what it's like to fully surrender to an idea. You know what that's like
Yeah.
now, and you know what it's like to give your heart to something
Mm,
100%, and now just, like, be okay with that. Like, you learned how to do
yeah.
it, maybe in the wrong way, but you did it from a heart of love."
But you got there, right? And
Yeah,
that's part of
totally.
self-compassion is, I talk about this a little bit in the book and a lot with my coaching clients is like,
Yeah.
you it's okay to be mad at yourself for the way things happened in the past, but you have to be really careful that you are not self-harming
Mhm.
by resenting you
Yeah,
doing the best that you could in the moment. And
right.
you've got to really work hard to deprogram and get to the place where you're actually celebrating how quickly you get triggered by unhealthy things because that's your body trying to keep you safe.
Mm, yeah.
Cool, right? Like, not necessarily celebrating how bad it feels, but like, oh my gosh, my brain got totally flooded with those emotions. Thank you so much for recognizing danger and protecting me.
Hmm.
And also, I'm here and I've got this and it's not a threat. So, nervous system, we can calm down. Like,
Yeah.
we can go out back and we can cry for 5 minutes and we can come back and it'll be okay because we've released all of that and we got here. And sometimes that's all that
Woohoo!
matters.
That's right.
We got it. Even if you did not get out of bed this morning, even if the anxiety and the depression and the grief is so heavy that you're
Mhm.
still in bed and it's 10 o'clock at night, you're still here. And that's
Yeah.
worth celebrating and that's worth compassion. Even if you're not where you think you should be or want to be,
Mm.
you're here. And
Yeah.
and that's more than enough for today.
Oof. I love that. That's beautiful. Angela, you are such a gift to the world. You
Thank
really are.
you.
I love it. She's lovely. She
Well,
really
it's
wants to help people through this. And that is beautiful. I love
yeah.
that. That is, I mean, that's kind of how that's my heart.
Yeah.
It's,
I
I love
just want
it.
people to be okay. It's
Yeah.
okay if you're not flourishing today. And
Yeah.
if your life is a dumpster fire, it's okay. I am still glad you're here. I'm just
Yeah.
I'm still glad you're here.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. I think that's important. That's such a simple message, but, like, when
Mhm.
you're in the throes of the grief
Right.
and the
Right.
anger and the frustration and recognizing, "Oh my goodness, I believed that, and I believed that,"
Yep.
it's rough, but I can promise you, like, Angela and I have both been through this.
Yeah.
We made it, you'll make it. you just may need somebody to walk alongside of you. And I know
Yeah.
Angela is a coach. I am a coach. We've got coaches that can help you do that. And I
Yeah.
think, just you're going to be okay.
Yeah. And I think that there's a you're gonna be okay that's sort of a spiritual bypassing, like, oh, just
Yes.
suck it up. That's not it. Okay.
No.
I'm
Mm-mm.
talking about sackcloth and ashes and you've
Yes.
lost everything.
Mm.
You're okay. You're going to be okay. You're okay right now, even if it doesn't feel like it. And you're not alone. There are
No.
thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people going through this right now. So find your community. Even if it's not mine, find a therapist, find a coach, like,
Exactly.
and
Yes. Find somebody.
find a book that at least gives you a little bit of hope. Find a totally trashy Netflix show that helps you tap into your rage. Y'all,
Yes.
Taylor Swift breakup songs.
When you're breaking up with evangelicalism, it can
Uh-huh.
feel a little like that.
Or Alanis Morissette. 90s
Oh,
rage,
yeah.
90s women's rage is
Ooh.
holy and sacred in ways that we will never understand, and that's okay. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love this. This has been so much fun. I
It
cannot thank you
has.
enough for your time and your wisdom and for sharing your heart with us and your journey. And I honor
Mhm.
your journey, Angela.
Thank
That
you.
was, I mean, it was raw and real and beautiful and all the things that these journeys are. And most importantly, it's yours.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
that's nobody else has your journey. And it looks so
Yeah.
different than everybody else. But it's just a testimony to all of us that no matter what
Right.
your journey looks like, there's freedom on the other side. Like,
Yeah.
just hang in there.
And
Yeah.
there's no one way to do it, so give yourself a
Right.
break. Don't make your
Yes.
journey like mine or like Leslie's or like
Right.
anybody else that's on the internet. Like,
Mhm.
that's just joining another cult.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Like, you deserve to actually be free and to live in a world where you can make your own decisions, even if the world's not ready for it. So just trust yourself and keep going.
Mm.